Brought more fire to douse dudes and playing by house rules. I'm laid back like a couch dude. I'm that dude to make his own beats, writes his own rhymes, records his own shit. Probably why it takes so much time to put out an album. Man, I'm always behind schedule. Ain't that I ain't hungry, I just always got my plate full. Try to digest all the topics that I'm spitting. You need to sit back and actually take the time to listen. We living in a new age where mind states are feeble. Kids' attention spans are shorter than Danny DeVito. My beats though, be banging, be about my business. Bass stays knocking like a Jehovah Witness. Leave them scattering when chattering. The gang of rhyme patterns. I ain't worth challenging. You all need some aspirin. Aspiring to be me, no empires to feed. Just a chosen few that's flowing through. Firing up the weed. Jesus, crazy what the world coming to. I'm here to live it, make music. For y'all is just hanging on a gimmick, huh? Wait a minute, man. Don't get me confused with none of these newbie-ass rappers, man. I know the game be feeling fucked up, but I've been making beats since 95, regardless if I had the right emotion or not. Word up. Hey, yo, I ain't always humble. I ain't always intense. I've had my good and bad days like anyone else, more or less. Probably a lot more than less, or the more of it in a sense. Feel blessed, so I just move forward through the stress. But don't smoke stress. Smoke the bombest weed you ever seen. Cannabis club category, certified Cali green. Type of bomb that I keep up in my sack. They give a lot of cats anxiety attacks. There's no denying the facts. But enough about the weed, though. I keep it on a need-to-know basis. It's time for me to cut to the chase quick. So download the free LP. Spread it to your friends and family. Even to the little haters mad at me. I got 2 official LPs coming after these. So far I'm grateful for the love that's coming back to me. Truly appreciate the support, especially my peeps that had my back when I was going in and out of court. But of course a shout out to all my people. Kept the game alive instead of killing it. Selling out with weak flows, my crew. Anyone that gave an honest point of view. Much respect besides me, man. I do this shit for you, yeah, for you.
This game is very important to listen to all these texts. We're going to combine things in this game.
So suspect.
We're live again. I don't know why I always feel so surprised when that happens. Welcome, folks. Welcome. Happy Friday. Happy to Wartime Optimism number 27, I think. Oleg, welcome. It is Friday. It's Paintover day. We have 4 to look at today, and we're doing a slightly different format than we normally do. I've already done the Paintovers. We're going to watch time lapses, and I'm going to be able to talk without having to try to think through how not to mess up at the same time. We're going to see how it's going to go. So a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you guys for dealing with the change of time yesterday. I hope you guys checked out the Playgrounds Festival. I thought it was awesome. I really enjoyed the presentations, talking to everybody there. I'm glad that I saw some of your guys' name in the chat. It was awesome. Just a great community, and I think those guys really knocked it out of the park. So thank you guys for that. Other things. Fabio's competition is still going on for Star Wars. Something like that. There's a link down below to Fabio's YouTube channel if you guys haven't done it. I'm guessing most of you guys know about it already, since we're looking at 3 of those images from the last competition today, which I'm super excited about. And then the cover I did for the heavy metal kit from Kit Bash, they just released a post that's kind of like a brief breakdown of how I went through the whole process. I'm still going to be making a video of that. Don't know when that's going to be done, but there's a link to that also below if you guys care to check it out. Okay, so, and then the last thing is Thomas Dubois has agreed to do Paintovers with me next Friday. I'm way excited. If you guys want to submit some renderings or sketches or ideas or finished render, whatever you guys want, send them to mike@droki.com or find me on any of these social medias so that Thomas will have a nice choice of images to paint over, and you guys might be lucky and get Thomas to do a paint over on your image. I'm really excited for that. I can't wait to see how that guy works. Okay, so let's get into it. I think that I covered everything. Michaela, it was great seeing you there. Pete's in the chat. Yeah, Playgrounds was awesome. I was blown away. If I could listen to 2 things at once, I would have listened to all of the talks, but I watched all of them and listened to one at a time. They were awesome. So I'm glad you guys made it. Let's do some Paintovers. Okay, let's get organized. I promised I would be here every day. I did not promise that I would be organized every day, but we're kind of organized. Okay, so first, I think what I'm thinking for this, trying out this new format, is we'll look at the image first. If this wants to turn on. Oh, Martin, where are you? My Wacom's letting me down again. Ooh, there we go. I just had to press it a bunch of times. Okay. Okay, so the first image is the only image we're looking at today that does not include a Macintosh and is not part of the competition. This one is from Ian Vicnair, who I already saw is in the chat. Welcome, buddy. He sent me this guy using, it looks like some of the Utopia kit from Kit Bash. And it's a beautiful image. This is down-sampled for painting purposes, but I thought I would at very least give you guys a look at what it looked like before. And this is like very finished. I love the color palette in this. The first thing I looked at when I thought it, and what we're going to see me kind of working through and painting here in a second, is we have the Dutch tilt kind of going on, which to me suggests like either there should be more dynamic movement in the image, but we have the kind of main focus right in the middle, which just didn't feel, I felt like those two ideas were kind of jarring. So this is where we're going to end up on this paint. I didn't do a lot to it. I added a little bit more, maybe a little bit too much, added color and kind of like brightness to the city itself. But the biggest kind of change, and it's kind of a minor one, is just compositionally. I pulled out this bottom edge of the earth here a little bit, and, kind of move things a little bit off to the side. So I guess I need to cue this up properly. Let's see what I did in real time. So you can kind of see me figuring these things out. Excuse me, hopefully. Okay. That doesn't seem right at all. Let me see here if I can fix that for you so that you guys can actually see the whole thing. Maybe that's just all we can see. Just trying to get a little bit more of the main frame so that it's not sitting in the middle. I think that's a little bit better. Okay, let's press play. So yeah, just kind of looking at the whole thing, checking it out. There's amazing, beautiful detail in this, and it's all very well controlled. It obviously gets quite a bit looser by the end of this because I'm doing everything kind of quickly without masks. I do like the tightness that's already in this image. I first kind of started painting out some of the clouds, and I was thinking to myself, this is sky. If we're going to do something in sky, I'm okay with cheating a little atmosphere around the moon, because that could kind of be lens blur, or it could also be atmosphere within the city itself, but clouds wouldn't make sense in space. And then I realized this is more of a floating city than like a space station city. And that's when I actually bring out that horizon just a little bit down at the bottom a little bit later to kind of drive home that point. But yeah, so the idea of these ships coming in and out on this kind of line directly to the left and directly to the right of the city, I liked, but you couldn't really see it as a compositional element. So I do a couple of things to kind of try and bring that out and make that a little bit more visually, give it a little bit more visual weight. But most of what I'm doing is kind of like simple stuff. I really like where you got this image to, Ian, and everything I'm doing is kind of nitpicky. The biggest thing we've already done, and I think I actually make it smaller again at some point in this. And really, it's just I thought we had two options for it, and with one option, okay, if this idea is this floating kind of peaceful city, then I'd get rid of the Dutch tilt altogether and let it sit standing upright, floating in the clouds, right, and be beautiful and serene. I think that'd be one direction to go if you really wanted it to feel a little bit more peaceful. I think that the idea of doing it with this tilted horizon was to make it feel more dynamic. And if you're going to do that, I would argue, obviously everything that I'm saying and doing today is my opinion only, and it's all very subjective. But my position would be is that then a centered composition where the city's just sitting and floating in the middle of the canvas doesn't work towards that. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else major. I mean, these are nitpicky things. Ian, I think you did a great job with this image. I really, really like it. And the color palette, I did bring some greens down into the bottom, which if I was editing this totally. I would probably adjust again. I don't love the greens, but the idea that the bottom is terrestrial and the top is space, I think should have some very subtle color cue to that being a difference, right? To really ground a viewer that this is floating over a planet and not floating somewhere in the deep dark fantasies of space. But yeah, so whenever you see me, and this goes for everything today, whenever you see me doing like random things that don't really matter, like painting out banding or like adding little details to the clouds, most of those little details, that's just something I'm doing while I'm thinking. I added some rim lights very subtly to the moon, right? If you were looking at this angle from this distance, you'd get some of these kind of sharp highlights right at the edges of things, I think. That would tie the moon a little bit more into it, that felt just a little bit static behind there. And you could do that in 3D or in post. I think I would probably do it in 3D, or I would do it with a normals map. Just to get those just faint little edges, and it'd be much easier to do with your full resolution version than the one I downsampled it to paint on. But that's kind of about it. I keep kind of, I think everything from here on out is me just kind of noodling. I can't help noodling on this, especially because I feel like it's good practice for me. Oh, this is one thing. I tried putting an actual planet at night down here, and it didn't work out. I try it. Obviously, I changed the color of it. We try my quick little trick of match color. That didn't work well. Sometimes you get like a really good quick result from that. Sometimes you don't. So I just kind of quickly laid it in. And then that wasn't working. I looked closer at what you had just barely there in the background. And you had like not nearly as much earth curvature. So you were imagining it much closer to the earth than I was at this moment. And so I go in and I just draw a horizon line and just give a little bit of light to the edge. And I actually might do a little bit too much. You just want like a hint that there is an edge there. And the sky is almost always going to be a little bit brighter than the ground. So that's kind of the direction that I went there, just to ground the viewer into what we're looking at just a little bit. The idea to do 3 moons, that could be cool, but that would be a different composition. But yeah, so let's see what else. I kind of cleaned some stuff up a little bit. I liked that there was atmosphere with a floating space, and so I did add a bit more, but it gets a little bit rough. We have some halos all over the place. This doesn't work out right here. I try to do it. But yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything else to say. I think this is a great piece. I love the color. I love the tonality you have in it from the beginning. I'm looking at the original here on my other monitor that you guys can't see. Yeah, it was really just where you're placing the main subject. I went back and forth on whether or not I should change the moon. I think if this was an earlier rendering, if this was like rougher to begin with, I might have quickly tried playing with putting the moon in other places. Maybe that's a place where you put some other ones. Right behind the subject, I ended up leaving it. It wasn't a big enough. I'm not sure if something else would be better without actually trying it. But that was a thought that I had in my mind, and I think more than anything, laziness kind of. I don't think it's wrong there, even though I think it might be better somewhere else. And then laziness kept me from moving it. If we're being honest with each other, which I try to do. Did I use motion blur on the sides? Yes, I did. Mostly just so that I could stretch out those little bright highlights that you had on like the cockpits or in the front of them, and then layer it in screens and color dodge, really just to bring them out. The intent wasn't to give it like motion blur. Here's a whole bunch of motion blur. But again, it's not to make the whole thing moving. The idea is just to give like little like hints and flares for whatever reason it might be. But yeah, for the ships a little bit I think helped. I did more than necessary just to easily pull it out without just putting brush strokes in that spot, was kind of the thinking. And then this is less to suggest that the thing is moving really fast. I don't want the whole thing to blur, but I do like the idea that the lights have like some, it's not quite a lens flare. It looks a little bit anamorphic, though obviously it's not horizontal, which is what an anamorphic would do. I just think it gives a little bit more life to the image. And I might have overdone it doing it quickly. I have a tendency to overdo things. But just that little bit of like what would be a camera or atmospheric kind of mistake. Okay, let's pause. This is the next one we're going to do. And we'll pause it right at the beginning. And we'll switch screens. Oops. And way to be organized. Okay. So this was the before. Can you guys see the whole thing? I don't know if you can see the whole thing or not. Let's go big. There we go. This was the before, and this was the after. And mostly compositional, and then just adding a bit more life into the way that the lighting works. To me, just makes these feel a little bit more glowy, or in some places a lot more glowy, and a little bit more alive and vibrant was the idea there. But overall, pretty minor suggestions. I gotta say, I think you did a great job on this, Ian. Awesome work. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for submitting an image. Very much appreciate it. Let's catch up with the chat. I haven't said hello to everybody. Hello. I hope everybody is doing well and having a good Friday, and that they had a good week, and that they're home and safe and enjoying the company of the people that they're staying with. And if that means you are by yourself, I hope that you're enjoying your own company. Okay. So let's see the chat. Who we got going on? Milan, really good to see you. Rama, good to see you as well. Pedro, Michaela, we already said hi to you guys, but hello again. Luca, good to see you again. I appreciate all you guys coming and hanging out very, very much. It is appreciated. Vlad, what's going on? Strong Side Studio, what's going on, man? Thank you for coming along. And Daniel as well. Okay, image number 2 that we're looking at today. I like this. We're moving along. I don't feel stressed or pressured or worried about time. I think this format's going to stick. Okay, image number 2 is from Marcelo Santos. This image is rad. So this was for the matte competition with Fabio last week. We judged it last week. Yeah, last week. And this... Oh, Michaela, that's funny. I like it. And then you made me lose my train of thought. This image, I was judging last week, and this is one of the ones that made it almost to my final cut. Didn't quite get there, but there was a bunch of images that a different day and a different mood would have made it there. One of the things that I love that's already in this image is we have like the strong blues and just a hint of red on the left side of the image. And then on the right, we still have that blue that ties everything together, and then some reds dominating the right side a little bit more clearly, which I really, really liked in this image. And then execution-wise, we have a cool design. I like that it's kind of glowy and blue. I like that the white is not blown out to white. There's a little bit of blue and then a really strong blue where it's affecting, which informs the color of the brightness. So on a technical level, my hats are off, and I think this is really good. I think from the more kind of compositional storytelling side, I think that's where I wanted to tweak just a few things. And we're going to go over it, and we're going to see me kind of experimenting and thinking through this process. But what I ultimately decided was that right now, and we're going to see a similar problem in the next image. Oh, and I'm doing these out of order. We already thought we were going to... Okay, so... Jamie, we're going to do yours later. Apparently I have things organized differently on the video than on this, but I'm already talking about this, so we're just going to skip ahead and then go back. So, sorry about that. But yeah, so the big thing that I saw in this image that was like a struggle with it is there's kind of an equal amount of like visual weight and size and importance to both the profile of our floating cool robot dude and the computer itself. And this is one of those positions where I think it's really good for artists to take a stance between subject A and subject B. And we're going to still show off both of them, but that you should be able to say this image is about the computer or about the robot. And then you want everything to work towards it. So given the composition, I ended up prioritizing the computer, which strangely enough I did by making it a little bit smaller and making the robot bigger, and then also cropping it, right? Like there's some beautiful detail in the robot here, and obviously I like how it reflects on the wood and everything. I think it's a really cool part of the image, but I don't think it's helping the overall image. And as I was telling to a good friend of mine the other day, sometimes you have to kill your heroes, and even if you love something, if it's hurting the image, you have to be willing to sacrifice it. So this was what I came up with at the end. Obviously, it doesn't look as beautiful as the original does because it's sloppily painted. But I let more of the back of him fall into black. I got rid of the bright red, though I think you could pull out some highlights of red or adjust the model if you wanted to keep a little bit more of it in there. But the emphasis is now on the computer, and then the robot informs the scene very, very heavily, but it's still pushing your attention back to the computer, at least to me. Again, everything today is super subjective, and it all paintovers. You can disagree with every single thing that I'm saying and absolutely be right. This was another mock-up of like the same idea that I did pulling this in, and now I felt like the red here got a little bit too close to the edge. And so I think if you were going to go this route, you would want to, well, you'd want to do something, and I'm not sure what. You could move it up into like a different piece of geometry or continue shifting the piece. So without further ado, let's see me try to figure this guy out. Because I don't figure out everything that quickly. It takes me a little bit of time, which is hopefully helpful. Okay. Let's see, transition. You guys should be able to see the video now, and let's let that play. And while that's starting, oh, we've already made it darker, but I'm just starting. So I made it darker just to kind of focus things. Let's get some tunes on in the background, shall we? We should start a thing where you guys have to like guess how long it's going to take for me to think about putting some music on. Okay, let's see. Play. Okay, here's the little tunes for you. I hope you guys can hear that. So pretty quickly I start getting to the idea of like, let's change the composition. Another thing is that when I or the aspect ratio, and when I change the aspect ratio, and we're going to bring that back here in a second, one of the things that happens really quickly is that we cut off more of the robot, and whenever you cut something off in a frame, you're generally saying that that's not important. So it is a very subconscious, easy way to tell the viewer what you're supposed to be focusing on, even when you do something like a portrait. When you have a portrait that cuts off the top of the head and like, you know, right at the neck or whatever else, it's really putting the attention and the weight of that image of what you're trying to say in the facial features itself, as opposed to, you know, somebody's bald head or, you know, their body language or what's behind them. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but we end up cutting off more and more and more to really focus the attention in on what I think is what I've chosen to go with as a subject. And you could very easily change this to say it's about the guy or the robot and less about the computer, and then I would that would have been a harder one to draw, and that might have informed my decision in how I painted this over. But if you were going to make it about the guy in front of the computer, you'd want to read his silhouette initially more clearly. At least that would be like my first thought, and then play around with it some more. So yeah, now we get to see how I don't know how to paint robots, and so please forgive that. One of the things that I continue to learn as I'm doing more and more of these paintovers for you guys, and also using them more and more and more in my own work, is that you really start to develop a shorthand for yourself in how you can interpret your own sketching, so that if you've never seen me sketch and you're not expecting this to look as bad as it does, that's going to be a little bit off-putting. And for your own work, you need to figure out a way to kind of ignore that, right? To see past it, to be able to say, okay, I'm giving myself enough visual information that I can imagine what the end product would be. And here, I'm starting to think he's way too dominating the whole frame now, is kind of the thought. And so, yeah, we take him and we start moving him back. Even when moving things around in the frame, I just have a tendency to overdo things. So now we're going and just kind of painting out a clean background so that we can move him freely. I paint over the glasses here. I actually really liked the glasses because it kind of suggested that somebody else belongs at this computer and this robot's not supposed to be there. I think that that's a cool little added detail to this image, and I think that it should definitely stay. But compositionally, that's more like story and detail. Compositionally, it doesn't affect the composition, and so I kind of painted over it and didn't paint it back in. But yeah, just to be clear, I liked the glasses. I hope they wouldn't go away. And so now we're just kind of continuing to focus on like coloration, right? Dropping those shadows again is again pushing the computer forward visually in the image and letting the robot dude, the techie dude, disappear. And right now what you're seeing is I went back to the original to say like, okay, after doing all of that painting and cropping, I have a pretty clear idea of what I want to do. What's going to happen if I go back and kind of remock it up a little bit more cleanly? And actually, I ultimately didn't like this as much. This was more kind of an experiment for me. But like all of the little things that I did at the beginning that I ended up throwing away or not doing or using, ultimately, that's what gets you there, right? Is working, trying to solve a problem. This is what's bothering me. What are some ideas I can do that'll maybe help that? Let's quickly try it, give myself something to react to, and see if it feels that way or not. And then we'll kind of figure things out. I put some little reflections on the glasses like that. Those little things is like me thinking whilst working. Much like painting out gradients or, shadows. It's not important, but it's giving my brain a little chance to think without like just stopping altogether. So yeah, pulling back that, right? That back top corner really defines the robot's silhouette. And if we're trying to get him to disappear, even though I liked some of the details that were in there, those need to be darker. Maybe not as dark as I made them, but you don't want that hard contrast line up at the corner to read as super important. And yeah, just darkening in, anything that's distracting. Right, one of the kind of key ideas is anything in your image should be helping the image. If not, it's probably worth getting rid of. Right, so much of like clear communication is simplification, at least by my view. It also means that you don't have to make as many things in 3D or spend as much time detailing them anyways. So yeah, Marcelo, awesome work on this. I think this is just about done. And now you can see I'm kind of toggling A, B to see which one I like more. And I ultimately go with the one without the bottom. I like that bottom, but I just couldn't make it work, at least not in the time I had to play with it. But amazing work, dude. Really like this one. Like the color palette. Like the idea behind it. Love some of the details in it. Just super cool. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything else that I wanted to say about this one? I don't think so. No, I think I said everything I meant to. Marcel, also Mark, thank you for submitting the image, for letting me paint over it in front of everyone. I think you did amazing work. I hope you found something in that helpful or insightful, or at least a little bit, or not. It's so much of this is opinion, but I really enjoyed grappling with this one, especially because I don't paint a lot of close-ups ever, really. Paint over them because I don't make a lot of them. So it was fun practice for me. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys got something out of it. Moving on to the next one. The next one that we are going to do is Anwar's image. Anwar, thank you for submitting this image. Love this idea, the computer and the well. I see some kit bash there in the back. One of my favorite kits. Let me cue up the video so I don't have to think about it later. So one of the things, like the first things that struck me when I looked at it, there's 3 images. We've talked about 3 images before. I don't know if we have time to talk about it today. But here's one of them, and here's the other one. This one I thought had like the most potential to tell like a really cool story, especially because like, okay, we already have the idea of a person there and everything else. But when you're sending out 3 images, especially for a competition, you sent them to me, that wasn't part of the competition, but if you guys are submitting images for a competition, take a stance. Even if you're wrong, it's always better to say, this is the thing that I think is the best. It's good for you in practice of, here's how you make a difference, here's how you make a decision and stick with it, and it's better for the judges, because you don't want judges like flipping between 2 options and then basically saying like, yeah, this one's cool, but this one did this and that one doesn't do that. Like, you're giving them a very direct way of saying they could have done something cooler that they didn't do, that they may or may not have noticed on their own. So that's my 2 cents from a judging perspective. Now, so I decided to paint over this image, and I ended up going to like full black and white and repainting the whole thing. And we're gonna see some of like my first thoughts. But one of the things that immediately kind of jumped out is that we have some scale issues, right? This computer looks huge compared to this barrel, but it doesn't look believably huge because it's not. It just looks a little bit out of scale. And we don't really have any depth separating the scene. If we kind of pull it back, it all kind of blends together a little bit. And so where I ended was saying, okay, color is not important, the thing that we need to fix yet. I do like the ideas of these kind of desaturated reds with this vibrant blue and kind of soft green yellows. I think the palette's really nice, but my suggestions for this are all kind of compositional and where you place things. So we go to black and white and we end up drawing over the whole thing. We basically draw it back to a thumbnail of saying maybe we give this a little bit of room to breathe right now in the standard one. We have another situation where everything's kind of taking up the well's not taking up the whole frame, but it's also doesn't have any room to breathe within the frame, if that makes any sense. And so you could go closer, and you did go closer on this one, which there's something to be said for that. I think we could probably just paint some depth into this. For this one, though, I think that you want to give it a little bit more room to sit. And there's also a sense, to me, when I look at this, and I'm not entirely sure why, there's a sense that this well is like kind of proud, and maybe it's just the tilt of the computer and the size of the computer. And it reads on it, the end of the fucking world. And so my thought is, let's give it a little bit of breath and like let it feel a little bit more diminutive. So let's start watching the painting. This is like this thumbnail sketch of how I would adjust the camera and some of the relative proportions in this image to go forward. But you'll see that this isn't my first instinct as far as what to do, which you're gonna see here in a second. It takes me a little bit to figure out. Okay. Alright. So my first thought was like basically the fixing the scalar changes in the image. And I did this by editing it first, and then I pretty quickly decided that there's so many things going on, and the foliage is like confusing to look at. There's some parts of the foliage like right here that are behind her, even though they should be in front of her. And like there's no visual cues that give you an easy way to kind of understand what's in front of what all the way through, which is like adding just even a simple amount of depth, even if you don't go like foggy, a little amount of atmospheric perspective, such that things get less saturated and the blacks get lighter as things move away, will go a long way just to making everything going on in this image more intelligible. So here I'm kind of moving some things around. It looks like a mess, but I'm starting to think through ideas of what I would do with this. But then when you'll see when I go into painting, I take a lot of the contrast out of this image. I kind of start drawing things in with lines, and then I effectively paint in a depth mask, right? Which is, or like a Z depth mask, which is an easy way for you to start thinking about, here's how my scene exists in space, and here's what I need to make sure, here's what I need to make sure reads all the way through. I hope that made sense. I have the feeling, a hunch, that YouTube's mad at me at the moment, which sometimes happens, but I think it's still going. If someone in the chat can let me know that it's still going, I think that it is. But you get these messages, and sometimes they mean it's not working, and sometimes they mean nothing. I don't get it. So yeah, so I'm just kind of going in and getting some lines in there to place like, okay, these make sense. And I made one mistake here that I fixed later. But giving everything a sense to breathe makes the end of the world, it tells us, I guess, a slightly different story. Khalid, thank you. Okay. Glad that it is working. So yeah, so this gives everything a little bit a sense to breathe. I ended up fixing the scale problem by making her smaller, the character smaller, and putting her on steps. I like the idea of something that starts to guide you or give you a hint of how the foreground relates to the background. Even if it's just a suggestion, those little suggestions to a viewer can be really powerful as far as them being able to imagine the space for themselves or kind of occupy it in their minds. And I think you could probably do that, what's now on the right side, because the image is flipped, a little bit there too, what you're going to see. There's one, I don't pick up on this I think for a while, but the fact that the edge of this building line, as I've drawn it, I can't remember if it's in the original image or not, this building line comes straight down in line with the edge of the well post. And that, usually called like a tangency, is a bad thing because it makes it very unclear the relationship between the two. So I do fix that at some point. I'm actually kind of curious to see how long I go before I notice it. And you'll see, like, you start to pull out the head a little bit so that you read her profile. And like right now we still have a depth map, so I'm not really painting color, but I am kind of painting how I would approach the values and try to like get them to sort of start to work this way in 3D probably before I get back into post. And a lot of it's just clarity, right? I'm simplifying almost everything that's in the image so that it's more legible at a first read, or trying to. And I probably could have done better with the character. To me, this is about the computer. So the fact that the character gets lost a little bit with this edge, like she just barely breaks the edge of this post. You do get her head. I do think she would read fine, especially if she wasn't drawn poorly. If this was about the character and not about the computer, you'd want to read her silhouette more clearly, or at least like the top half of her silhouette more clearly. That would be my 2 cents. And I think that there's probably a few different ways you could do it. I think you could move closer, and a lot of the comments that I have for this one, as far as making depth a little bit more legible and getting that kind of first read to make more sense. Oh, I'm finally fixing this. And then I overfix it, and then I try a different idea, and then I go back to just moving it a little bit. But your other 2 images, I would say, also suffer just from like, there's a lot of like noise and texture in it, which I do tend to like. Because it kind of gives a painterly vibe, but you have to be careful that you don't do it in such a way that it inhibits legibility. You want that to serve. You can use texture to like blur out details and make details less important, which isn't a bad thing. You don't want it to affect the actual legibility of your image. Would be my suggestion. So I think we're close to done on the drawing on this one. Getting there, anyways. There's an implicit part about this that I didn't talk about, but I clearly like because I didn't change anything to it. Why this computer is lit up, but inside of a well, inside of an oil tin. I'd love to know if you had a specific idea about that. I don't think you necessarily needed to have a specific idea. I just think it's cool because it makes you wonder, and I think that's always a good thing in an image. So now we don't have these overlapping. We could have gone either way with it. It really didn't matter, but you don't want those, tangent lines to sync up in such a way, that they become visually confusing. And so I think this one just about wraps up here. Just pulling out little details. At this point, I'm just trying to make my sketch more legible. I don't think I change anything at this point. Nope, that's the end of that. Okay, so Anwar, those would be my 2 cents. I think first focus on legibility and composition, and then you can go back and worry about all of the details. Will be my idea. The idea was the person is getting out of water, but should I fully understood that the person's getting out water? I'm not entirely sure about that. What you mean by that? But we are going to continue moving along. One more time, the before and after, if I can use but computer. So like again, the major things, if we look in, we can figure out there's a barrel and there's a computer and a person and everything else. But if we pull this back and look at it small, it's just colors, right? We don't have any clear colors. Aren't a good separator for the human eye. You really want values to draw that, and actually that's the first thing that we're going to talk about in the next image, is value control. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. Awesome work. Thank you for submitting the image for me. I hope it was helpful. I would encourage you and everybody, if you did see any ideas that you thought were worth trying or worth practicing, that you actually try and practice them. Whether or not you share it or not is up to you. But totally trying to practice just a little bit is it will help those things actually like sink in and figure out what does work for you and what doesn't. So those are my 2 cents on that one. Moving on to the last one for today, we have Jamie, or maybe Jaime Diaz Alvarez, who produced this really rockin' image. This was also for the MAC competition with Fabio. This is based off of an alternate ending to War Games, which I haven't seen that movie in so many years. I appreciate you mentioning it in the email, so that I knew it. I totally got it as soon as you said it. And you can see, obviously, in the original, all like the cool details. You have him and his girlfriend. What's the Ferris Bueller actor's name? It doesn't matter. And then obviously, like, shall we play a game? I think you nailed all of that stuff, and I like that you thought of a story and an idea behind it. Having that in your head is always a great thing. This is also downsampled, I believe, from the original one that you sent me. But like the texturing and weathering of all these materials is on point. Absolutely awesome. Yeah, so let's talk about what I did to decide kind of to change. So the first thing that I noticed when I looked at this is that we have kind of equal values almost everywhere. And so like we have light coming in from the sky, which the sky feels bluish here, but then in here it kind of turns reddish, and it matches this sky that's coming in, the skylight that's coming in from a hole up here, not only in hue and color, but also in like the general value of it. And then these lights up here, this light gets cooler, which is cool, so we know that the computer's something important in the image, but the values are pretty consistent all the way across. And so if we actually get rid of color, you can see that like the computer kind of disappears. Right now this image is relying almost exclusively on color, between the color of the screen and the light that happens to be on it, to say that the computer's something important in this, right? And it's competing very much with these like bright reds right next to it. And the background, it's got a lot of fog, but I don't think it has the right kind of depth, right? To it. And a lot of that is then because, in my opinion, that I figure out, for what I think, is that size-wise, we kind of have this line that's at the top of the desk, and everything that's important is happening right beneath it, right? We have the dude who's come back and discovered, like, the scene of where it all went wrong, which I love. The bones, which is just... Love the details, love the story, but compositionally, we have this dude, he kind of lines up with everything else, right? And he's kind of hugging into the other subject points. So it takes me a little bit to get to it and kind of figure out these critiques. It was a while of drawing before I start moving these things. But here's what I ended up with. And so you can see I enhanced both the color difference in the lights and the value difference, and pushed him back in the distance so that we have a scalar distance moving the viewer through the image. The part about the generator powering the computer, I didn't pick up on that read initially. I didn't think it was as important as your email suggested, and I kind of left it. I like the green. I think that the green is a nice way to tie these two elements together, where you have green here that brings you here, and then your eye naturally goes back to this dude. Which I gotta be using my mouse, otherwise you don't know what I'm pointing at. So I like that it's there. I didn't change it to make it a crucial part of the story, because I think that the big relationship is the dude in the background in here. So without further ado, let's watch me try and figure this out. Let's figure out, where does this one start. And this one, it takes me a little while again. And I tried 2 different ideas at the very beginning of this. which is like, first I say, what if we make the foreground darker? I'm trying to separate the values between the foreground and the background. And I try kind of two things. Neither of them quite work, but you know, part of doing thumbnails or paintovers for yourself is making mistakes and then figuring out a direction forward, right? And it's practicing that gets you to do that. Okay, so that's which one you got? You guys aren't looking at. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and this should skip right to his in a second. I think we flip through Ian's one more time. There we go. So I do some color corrections first because they were distracting me just a little, and then we start playing here. Let me catch up on the chat here. Okay. I love Jay Sinuous. Sinuous is the man. We were talking about him yesterday. I'm gonna have him on sometime in the future, hopefully soon. His music's awesome. If it's not your thing, totally get it. To each their own. But he also gave me permission to play his stuff, and I don't want to deal with copyright and dealing with music and finding it and everything else. I love listening to him, so that's who we got in the headphones. Anwar, awesome. I'm glad you're going to revisit it. Ian, I'm glad you're enjoying it. And Milan, you know, I'll do what I'll see what I can do for you guys. But for now, you know, you're just gonna be stuck with my music. I half apologize, not really. Oh, Colin, I do like lo-fi, and I work to lo-fi all of the time. I'm a huge fan of that. But I don't know of any that I can just play without worrying about copyright stuff. So you can see that I'm playing with the scale of things now. First I tried making it smaller so that it gets more into the guy. That's not working. And now I'm going in and playing with the guy itself to start placing him. And I kind of keep pushing him further and further back and further higher in the canvas. So I move him once, and then I'll move him again, and then I'll move him again, and then who knows how many times I actually move them all together. The difference in scale and like position, not only am I actually pushing him further back in the space, but I'm also pushing the viewer's eye further into the space so that they have to like conceptually travel deeper to get to it. And then now I'm trying to make more of a value difference between the two so I can draw out just the things that I want, right? There's a decent amount of detail in the original that I think is more distracting than it needs to be. And so I'm just kind of overdoing it. I tend to overdo things. Ian, I don't know who you're referring to with NF, so I don't think so. And I don't listen to Miyagi either. I mean, Mr. Miyagi, you gotta listen to Mr. Miyagi because he knows what he's talking about. But, yeah, any music suggestions are always welcome. I'm always looking for new tunes to work to. But yeah, playing a little bit with color, that was another thing. I don't think I really mentioned it, but giving a slight, and I probably overdo it again here, but giving a slight difference into the temperature of the lights coming in, one from the side and one from the top, is not necessarily the most realistic thing. Like there would be a color difference in the real world based off of what type of, whether it's sunlight coming in, which this doesn't quite feel like. It just feels like really bright ambient light to me. But there would be a difference just based off the part of the sky that's mainly fueling it. Visually, having them separated, I think, makes it easier to read the image as a whole. It makes it a little bit more interesting. So this might be a little bit overdone. You can see the top left one is a little bit warmer, so it kind of creates a diagonal with the foreground now, which is mainly lit with warm lights. And then the one coming out of the sky on what's the left of the image right now is a little bit cooler. And so just having a little bit of variation there, variation in color, especially subtle things, I think always brings life into things. So even though this is a painting, those color changes would be color changes I would do in the final as well, personally. And I think I keep making him smaller and smaller. We're gonna find out. Yeah, he gets small. He keeps getting smaller. He's still kind of lining up with where this desk is pointing to me. And I think that that's an unfortunate occurrence that I just did. I want him to seem separate from it. And I want the computer to be the focal point of the image and him to be informing how you read the scene as a whole. He's kind of the secondary read and secondary focal point for me. And that doesn't have to be the case. You could very easily shift this and go with just him. At one point earlier, I think you guys probably saw the desk get really small in the corner, and I didn't like the way that looked. But that was like one thought of me starting to think through, what if the guy becomes more important than the computer? Oh wait, maybe I'm doing it now, or maybe I'm just trying it again now. I don't know. I fight with this a decent amount, and I've not been paying enough attention to know what we've already seen me try and what we haven't. I think I end up moving it back. I think I leave it here and then I move it back again. I don't know. I can only remember these things so much. And so now obviously the perspective is like way warped, but you can see I keep moving him up in the frame, right? So I want an important focal point to be up at the top, and I think I do bring back the cool barbed wire edge and stuff. But again, the important thing to me is the relationship between our control center with all the amazing details and awesomeness going on, and the only character. And anytime you have a character in an image, even here where I've painted over him and drawn him out and he's kind of blending in parts to the background, the human eye is so sensitive to like the silhouette of a human that if you have one person in an image, no matter almost how small you make them, they are going to drive attention to themselves. And so you can make them small and smaller and smaller, and they still play a pretty important role within how an image reads to a viewer. And so I think this is his final resting spot size-wise. Pretty close to it anyways. And obviously, like, perspective is still a bit messed up. But I don't think you would even have to change geometry. You'd have to move him to get this and adjust the camera, but I don't think that you would have to adjust geometry to get that scale difference, right? Making that camera wider and moving it closer to the computer would make him smaller and seem further away. So there's a lot of ways that you could achieve this. You probably need to move the camera up a little bit to get him that high on the camera, high in the frame, I would guess. But yeah, I do not try to go in and fix all of the perspective for this one. And just bringing in just more contrast in between these warm lights and the bright light, such that at the end of it, if we flick on and off like a hue saturation layer, which I think I do at some point in the stream, and we can show it on my screen afterwards. If you desaturate this image so you're only looking at value and not any hue or color cues, you can still see that the max specifically is the important part of that center console. That's the idea behind like what I'm doing now, and I think I do it a little bit more as well. I think I actually have, you can set in Photoshop proof setup to black and white, like 20% dot gain, I think is what I use. It doesn't really matter. But so without adding a hue saturation layer all of the time, I can just press Control Y and continue working in color, but I'll only see black and white to make sure that my values are in order. Making sure your values work is super important, really in any image, because we're more sensitive to value contrasts than we are to almost anything else. And you can see how important those bones become when I was flicking things on and off there. And we'll go back now to the other screen. When I flick back and forth between the painted version, these guys, because they're bright white and they have really hard edges up against like some dark pieces, become super important, right? I've toned down the whites here and the blacks at the edges so that this doesn't read as strongly, right? Because this image is not about the bones. The bones are adding to the feeling of the whole thing, as is the destroyed building. But that's not the main focal point. Those are ancillary. What you want is the attention to go to the dude, and for me, or the computer and the dude. And so adjusting those, desaturating him or decontrasting him but just letting his silhouette read is enough for it to be important because, again, it's a human. And making the computer pop, because for me, this image is about the computer, is super important. So if we turn this to black and white, these become less important right down here because we have a bright green and a bright red. But that's okay. That's not the point of the image. The computer stays present even when I'm just looking at values, right? If we go back to the original, just to kind of point out what my eye was reacting to, when this goes to black and white, it becomes harder to see what's the important thing, to me at least, to my eyes. These lights are about as bright as this one. These are super duper bright, even though nothing else around them is that bright, including him. So these almost seem more important than this, and maybe they are, and maybe that was just my wrong read, and I should have emphasized them. That would have been an option. But that's the direction that I went with it, and I hope that that's a little bit helpful. I love this image. I love the story behind it. I love all of the details. Even though this is like a pretty heavy change over top of it, it's heavy just because the changes I wanted to make are hard to make without going painterly, moving people around and doing all that cleanly. It becomes a retouching exercise, and retouching can be fun when you just want to like zone out for a little while, but for something like this that takes forever and it's not worth it. Okay. What is that? Do you guys hear that? I don't know what that is. If that's coming through on the microphone, I apologize. But I hope that that was helpful, and I hope that it made sense one way or another. Jamie or Jaime, whichever one it might be, thank you for sending in your image. Amazing work. I hope that you found something that was worth hearing in that. I enjoyed working through and figuring out how I would approach this project. And again, to emphasize to everybody, everything here is just what I would do. It's not right. It's not wrong. What you would do or wouldn't do, not right or wrong either. The more opinions, I think, the better. And hopefully there's something that worked for you guys. And I think I like this format. Oleg. Oh. I guess, okay. I guess I can't. I was going to say you don't need to take notes. I don't know, but I'm leaving this up. I guess if I said anything stupid, it's going to live forever. But such is life. I do think I'm going to keep this format. I think this is better than me trying to paint live and talk to you guys and explain what I'm doing. You can see all the missteps that I made at the beginning of each one of these. And I don't... Well, let's talk about them as missteps. That was my first thought. I was like, what if we did this? And for at least 3 of the 4, I tried some things, and then I turned those layers off or deleted them, or then tried something else. And so you could call those mistakes or missteps, as we were talking about a couple of days ago. But those are really, that's the creative process, right? I have an idea. If you try it and look at it, if it doesn't work, you've informed yourself and probably given yourself an idea of what would help you move forward. So those types of missteps especially, I think, are super duper important, and making them, sitting there and wondering and trying to figure out if it's going to work before you do it is a fool's errand, and a fool's errand that I used to do all of the time, especially back when I was doing architectural design in school. Is I didn't want to do the wrong thing, and so I didn't do anything. You want to do something, even if it's completely wrong, even if you don't even know why you're doing it. Do something so that your brain has something to react to, and then move forward. I think I do that more when you guys aren't watching me as I work. A, because I'm just thinking about what I'm working on, and B, I'm not being self-conscious about making a mistake, because I'm still very aware of, oh, this doesn't look good, and they're expecting it to look good, and then I start focusing on that instead of focusing on what's the next thing to do. And we got through 4 of them today, and I'm pretty happy with all of them as far as how they came out. If I was working on any one of these images, where the paint over or edit or re-thumbnailing got to would be enough for me, if I was working on them, to say, okay, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go and try that, right? Because like the image that's still on the screen now, this one, maybe those ideas don't work, right? Once you get into 3D and start looking at it. But the thing is that you could go into 3D and start trying them and then continue to react to them. So, yeah, again, thank you to everybody who submitted an image. There's a couple of images that I haven't done paintovers for that I've already received. I haven't forgotten about you. I haven't missed you. I just, paintovers are on Friday and we only have an hour, so we can only get so many done. But thank you to everyone who's been submitting images. Thank you guys for being here and hanging out. I hope you enjoy it. I definitely enjoy being here with you guys. And next Friday, okay, so schedule stuff. Next Friday, Thomas Dubois should be doing paintovers with me. Got to talk to him again, get it firmed up. We got to get him images to paint. So if you want the great Thomas Dubois to paint over one of your images, send it to mike@droki.com or find me somewhere on the interwebs. My Droki Facebook page or Droki Instagram, and we can go from there. I might submit an image to have him do because I would love to see his take on one of my projects. So definitely get on that. The more choices for him, the better I think it'll be. On Monday, we have Patrick from Alt Shift coming. I am super duper excited. He's going to teach me what he knows in tie flow and why he likes it. I'm going to get to learn something. Hopefully it'll be entertaining. It's definitely going to be insightful, at least for me, and we'll try to make it enjoyable for you. I'm super excited about that, and we have a couple other things that we're trying to line up as well, which I'll let you know as soon as I can. But that's it. That's what I got for today. I'm getting back to real work. I hope you guys are all doing well. Thank you again for hanging out in the chat. Have a great weekend. If I don't see you on the daily streams on the weekend, I'll be here, but you may not. The weekend changes things. And yeah, tell somebody you love them today. Have a great one. I'm out. Well, almost out. Got the awkward boops to do. You know what I mean? We got one boop, and then we got to do the second one. Boop.